All right.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Jordan Becker. I am the secretary of the great class of 1982. And we've been doing these Zoom calls with our class since March 22nd. We've done 8 separate calls with our class, which has been an enormous amount of fun. And for this one, we thought we'd offer this up to all the alumni as part of reunions. So tonight, we're going to have, as you know, a conversation with my classmate and friend, Bart Gellman. And it will be moderated by my classmate and friend, Chris Chambers, the professor of media studies at Georgetown University. Everybody is going to be muted during this session. And so what we'd like everybody to do is if you have a question, please raise your hand. If you don't know how to raise your hand, you should be in a position to see on the screen right now. And if you can't, let me know. What you'll do is you'll hover your cursor over the screen. You'll see a bar at the bottom that has participants. You'll click on that and you'll get a sidebar. And once you do that, there'll be a place where there's a button that says raise hand that looks like that. And you'll click on it. And then we will call on you at the appropriate time, and we'll try to answer, or Bart will, I'm not going to answer any of your questions. Bart will be in a position to answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to stop the sharing, and I'm going to kick it over to, I suggest, by the way, that we have 87 people on the call. We have over 100 people or 130 people registered. So I strongly suggest that you go to speaker view, which you can get to by hovering your cursor on the screen, and on the upper right, it says speaker view. If you click on that, it'll toggle to speaker view, and that way you'll see, the people who are speaking, which for the most part will be Chris and Bart. So with that, Chris Chambers.
Thank you. And to all the people who I saw some of the messages, Hoya Saxa, all you Georgetown people out there, hello, hello, hello. I am honored and privileged to bring you this great person. I met him, obviously back, we were younger and had more hair. I was thinner, and he's always been just a pleasure and a delight. Whatever he was working on. Took kind of a back seat to him being a delightful person and an engaging person. So it is really just great tonight to be able, all these decades later, to interview him for reunions. Bart Gellman, 82, class of 82, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, author, lecturer, Emmy winner. He is a staff writer for The Atlantic magazine, one of my favorites, and a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. If you didn't know it already, he attained great fame and New York Times and LA Times awards for his bio of Dick Cheney, Angler, which is a very interesting, very dog-eared book on my shelves. And I've always been tickled when kids come over from our journalism concentration at Georgetown and say, "You knew Bart Gellman? Or you knew Joel Achenbach? You knew Todd Purdom? You knew Alison Cowan? You knew Lisa Belkin-Gelb and Liza Mundy?" And I'm like, yeah, they were all my classmates, but none of them were as cool as Bart Gellman. So with that, Bart, have I buttered you up enough so I can start sending you the hardball questions?
Yeah, you've earned every dollar I sent you. Good.
Well, let me give you like a 30-second context if you didn't already know about Edward Snowden. A lot of what takes place in the book pertains to that spring of 2013 when he had been an employee of Dell, working for the CIA, and then was an employee of Booz Allen working for NSA, and had taken anywhere, depending on who you believe, anywhere from 50,000 to over 1 million items of intelligence, including the NSA's PRISM data mining material. And he had contacted Bart, I believe after, or he contacted Glenn Greenwald, who was then with the Guardian, after the Post had not declined, I believe, to print some of the material. And from there, the rest is history. So let's jump right into that. And before, I just want to ask you these. I wouldn't say these are hardball questions, but they occur at the end of the book. And this isn't a spoiler or anything. Oh, and by the way, let me just. Here's the book. Please buy it. Dark Mirror by Bart Gellman. Please.
Are those Post-it notes?
Independent booksellers. What's that, Bart?
Are those Post-it notes in your
Those are
copy?
Post-it notes because it's going to be hardball tonight.
Man, dude did his homework.
That's right. So, but yeah, please patronize your independent bookstore to buy this book. You can give it to our fellow Princetonian, Jeff Bezos or Barnes and Noble, but your independent bookstores need this during this epidemic. But turning back to what I was saying before, I mean, at the end of the book, it was really intriguing to me. And one's kind of a medium question, and another one is very short. It's on page 353, right at the end of the book. And I'm reading from the last paragraph, basically. And this passage right here, I'm going to ask you to elucidate on this. The more time passed, the more the government mitigated its losses. Forensic detective work gave greater clarity about what Snowden took. Very simple sentence. Is this a final admission then that A, he did steal something, B, it was of great value to the government and probably should not have been released, and C, that it was a great loss? Is this an admission of all of those things? Because you have some of these other questions about, whether they should be spying and data mining and everything, but you seem to be saying here that, there was something bad that happened and the government did have to mitigate a great loss. Am I reading too much into that?
So first of all, there's no dispute that Snowden did take materials that he was not authorized to take, and he gave them to a person who was not authorized to receive them, that being me and two other journalists. So he does not contest his factual guilt of the offense. The government, of course, considered the whole thing to be immensely damaging. And I say in the book that I'm prepared to concede that there were losses of collection that resulted from his disclosures. That's the concession that I would make that that Snowden would not accept that. But there's a tension in the book and in the issue in the big picture, which is that there are things we need to know to hold our government accountable, and there are things that the government needs to hold secret in order to protect us. And sometimes they in there that I thought were easy calls, that they showed secret changes of law or complete contradictions between what the government said it was doing and what it was really doing, or that showed spying on Americans, secret spying on Americans by the NSA. And then there were hard cases where it was a legitimately sensitive story that you could imagine doing damage to the collection, but the public policy interest was also very strong. And I could talk about some of those later if you like.
Oh, definitely. Let me go to the little question then. And this is just in the acknowledgements. You acknowledge Laura Poitras, but you don't acknowledge Glenn Greenwald. Can you elaborate on that at all? Do you care to, or?
Well, I mean, I acknowledge Laura Poitras because she introduced me to Snowden.
Okay.
The sequence was he wanted to get in touch with journalists. He reached out to Glenn Greenwald. Greenwald did not know how to encrypt email and did not want to learn. So he ignored Snowden. Snowden said, I've got something important to tell you, but you have to learn how to use this gadget that will encrypt your email. And Greenwald let that go. So he went next to Laura Poitras, a filmmaker who made the very good film about Snowden called Citizen 4.
Right.
And she felt overwhelmed by what he was saying and didn't know whether he was for real or whether it was a trap or whether it was a nutcase. So she came to me because she knew I knew something about the subject, and we had worked together or been colleagues together as fellows at NYU at one point. So I thank her for the introduction. She became a competitor, and she tied her boat much more with Glenn than with me. But I never had a relationship with Glenn except getting yelled at him in public, yelled at by him in public.
Well, let's jump into some of this stuff before I get to, because we have limited time. A lot of my questions are going to be concentrated in what I thought was the most interesting chapter in the book, which was first fruits. But let me go back to some of the thornier questions about philosophy and policy. In the beginning of the book, or towards the beginning, in the backlash chapter, you have that section on page 164, if anybody's following along, where Keith Alexander, who was the NSA director, is testifying and told Congress that, we don't hold data on U.S. citizens. And then you have an interchange between James Clapper, who was the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, which has become a big deal under the Trump administration as to who would take that job, where he basically said, no, sir, we don't spy on Americans or hold any data on Americans, and he says not wittingly. Was that what set Snowden off, or were there other kinds of things, or was there something personal about him that compelled him to do what he did?
Well, as a journalist, I really wanted to know whether there was some aha moment, some dramatic event that caused Snowden to do this fairly spectacular act of transgression against the rules and the law he was living under. And I don't believe there was any single moment. He said at one point that the things that Clapper said, Clapper denied that there was any information that the US government was collecting on millions or tens of millions of Americans. That was untrue. He said that was, at one point, he said that was the moment that decided him. He had by that point already been stealing documents for a long time. He'd been gathering information to leak to journalists. He'd already been talking to journalists by that point. He had not given us anything. So it could in that way have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but I don't really believe there was one.
But those interchanges back in 2012, 2013, that kind of started a lot of conspiracy theories that we still hear about today. I mean, would you say that was the beginning of some of you heard the president talk about, Obamagate and things like that? Do you think that was the genesis of some of that stuff, that testimony of Alexander's and Clapper's back then?
To be honest, I don't think that has anything to do with what Trump has been talking about. Trump came in and decided one day to allege that he'd been spied on by Obama. There's never been the slightest evidence for that. It started off with the idea that they were literally spying on Trump. And I don't needed to get into the current political but it's nothing to do with the events that are depicted in this book.
Right. But just along that line, I mean, a lot of the players that we've seen dealing with the president in the last 2 or 3 years are in this book, such as Bob Mueller and Comey. Before we go to first fruits, could you describe what was it like rubbing shoulders with and even interviewing these guys?
Just now, my audio was off for 10 or 15 seconds. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. I was just saying that we'll dispose of the president quickly after this question. Is a lot of the players that have in this book are also players in his drama, such as Comey and Mueller. I said, what was it like interviewing them or rubbing shoulders with them in the context of this book. It seemed it was a lot more uncomfortable with Mueller than it was with Comey. Could you just go into that really quick?
Yeah, I feel like I should give the big picture for a second, because not everyone, I imagine, has had the opportunity to read the book. So the book is several intersecting stories. It's the story of Snowden, who he is, and how he got away with what he did. How did you steal a large volume of documents from the world's most proficient surveillance agency without being surveilled? There's a book about what he revealed. There's the narrative of what is the surveillance state, how does it operate, and then there's a third narrative which is much more about me and my interaction with the story, and how does investigative reporting work, sort of scene by scene at this level. How do I decide whether to trust this guy? How do I decide whether the documents are accurate? How do I decide what they mean? How do I decide what to publish? What are my interactions like inside the newsroom and with the US government? So that's the big picture. Part of the book is that I sit down with senior national security officials after the fact. I had been, sort of for a long time, a Washington Post reporter, mainstream media, national security reporter. I knew a lot of these people, and I had interviewed them before. And I was basically ostracized after the first Snowden stories. I was seen as, I was called an accomplice and an agent of a spy for having written some of these stories. Being called an accomplice has a legal meaning, and I found quite disturbing, since they had charged him with espionage. But that James Clapper, for example, called me an accomplice in testimony before the Senate in his sort of annual roundup of intelligence threats. Was the number one threat was Snowden that year, and his accomplices. After the fact, they gradually became willing to talk to me again, and so I have scenes in the book of long conversations with Jim Comey, with Jim Clapper, with the deputy director of the National Security Agency, people like that. Mueller, I've had informal conversations with since those events, but he's always been rather unforgiving. I appeared in a conversation like this with a live audience on a panel with him and Leon Panetta and Mike Morell of the CIA. And he's basically cross-examined me out there. There's a moment in the book in which you see the scene of Mueller asking me, well, were these documents not lawfully classified? And did you not publish them anyway? And so on and so forth. And I finally just sort of held out my wrists, and the audience laughed.
That was a funny
laughed, but he did not laugh.
Right. I was just, because I wanted people to get that context, because these players that we've been seeing lately in various policy crises are in this book. Let me pivot now quickly to first fruits. And I have to say, Bart, I mean, the first part of this chapter reads like a John le Carré novel, with you as almost like the spook that wants to retire or get away from this. I mean, I got paranoid just reading it. And I mean, the things that creeped me out the most were you not wanting to go into Disney World because you thought, with the tracker and the wristband. And then I believe it was Ashkan Soltani getting what's the term? Honey trapped, like that.
Honey trapped.
That Jennifer Lawrence movie with the Russian intelligence with their sex agents. I mean, it literally was like a movie. I mean, can you kind of walk everybody through what was going through your mind when your world kind of, got a little scary?
Look, from the first moment that I opened an electronic package and found inside it 50,000 highly classified US documents, I knew that I was going to become interesting to a lot of people, to the US government, the FBI, the Q group at NSA, to foreign intelligence services, to hackers of all stripes. And I felt like it was very important that I had an obligation once I decided that there were things in there became a target. I, Google notified me formally that a state-sponsored attacker was attempting to break into my devices. My screen is frozen, so I'm not sure whether y'all are hearing me.
I can hear you.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. So Google says you're a target. State-sponsored attackers are going after you. My iPad gutters out, the screen dissolves, it comes back on as a Unix terminal with computer commands marching up the screen that are ditching the operating system, loading a new kernel, and preparing to become a spy device. I sort of watched this happen in front of my eyes.
Did that, I mean, at that moment, when that screen, I think you were in a cab or an Uber, right? Or something like that?
I was, yeah.
I mean, I would have just melted onto the seat. I mean, you seem pretty calm. I did say you were a cool guy, but you seemed very cool given that was happening right there in the back of a car where your iPad screen turns into something out of a movie. You didn't freak out really at all? Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Now I do.
Okay. You didn't freak out? I would.
I
think we lost sound again. We lose sound?
I've got it again.
Okay.
Chris, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah. For everybody joking that the NSA is doing this, I would just be struck by lightning, actually.
Well, can you hear me, Bart? How about now?
Again.
Can you hear me?
Now I do.
Bart, is there any way that you could move someplace closer to your router or someplace where you
Not that I've got fantastic speed. It's I have a jittery connection that I have been trying to fix all day.
Okay.
But thank you.
Let me, along those lines, I know we're joking about the NSA doing it, but tell us about your suspicions or, confirmed facts that it was a lot of state-sponsored intelligence services were responsible for a lot of this. Russians, Chinese, et cetera. You even mentioned the Turks once. Can you elaborate on any of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, when Google tells you that you're under cyber attack, they don't tell you who's doing it. That's to protect their own ability to attribute and to detect the next one. They wouldn't tell me, but I used my journalistic sources and I found that that was the government of Turkey. That was the Turkish intelligence service. There were other times when I was told specifically that Russia and China were going after the documents.
Who was responsible did you ever, with Ashkan, Sultani, anybody ever find out who was responsible for the honey trapping?
No, a lot of this stuff is you just can't prove it. Ashkan's a young guy. He was on the dating site OkCupid, and sort of living his normal life, and then suddenly three very hot young women in a row reached out to him, which had not been his prior experience with OkCupid, and made it clear that they were interested in not just talking. The first one, for example, said on the day they were supposed to meet for the first time, said, it's rainy out, makes me want to cuddle. Can I just come over to your place?
Well, I mean, but nobody ever confirmed that that was state-sponsored. Oops, I think the sound went out again.
You don't hear me now?
Now I hear you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think we have some state-sponsored deviltry right here. Let me ask you that this chapter, First Fruits, could you explain what the significance of that title is and what that pertains to?
First Fruits was the name of a program the NSA used, and I think it might have been interagency among the intelligence agencies, to track, deter, and prevent leaks to the press. It was under a broader program called Denial and Deception. Denial and deception is the way that one intelligence agency tries to keep another intelligence agency from finding out what it's doing. And leaks were a problem because they sometimes exposed what the NSA was doing. And so the first time I found out about it was when I was looking through the documents that Snowden gave me, and I found my own name in the documents as the subject of one of these investigations, actually 3 investigations. 3 of my stories from the 90s had been referred to the Attorney General for a criminal investigation.
Oh, well, this was Ashcroft?
That was Ashcroft, yeah.
And this was around the time when things started to go wonky, like your computer screen would start to go crazy and things like that. That was around the time when you finally saw your name mentioned in these files, correct?
Yeah, I mean the signs of being under sort of cyber espionage efforts were episodic from the beginning and lasted for years. I mean, I was making it as hard as I could for someone to steal my materials. I kept that
was clear.
I mean, the documents are not on my iPad, but I mean, you can compromise one device and use it to jump to another device, that sort of thing. I mean, I kept the documents in a safe on a machine that was encrypted, and that I had opened up the machine to remove its networking hardware so that it couldn't touch the internet. And I kept the encryption key in a different place than the computer, and the computer was in a locked room with video camera security. But that doesn't mean that, you know, a resourceful state-sponsored intelligence agency, if it's willing to spend a lot of resources, can't get it.
Right. Well, let me, to piggyback on that, I want to go into just 1 or 2 journalistic questions, and then something about Snowden himself, and then we'll open up the questions because we're about half an hour in. With respect to all of that security at the Washington Post, did any of your fellow reporters, and maybe Joel can chime in here, I mean, wonder, what the hell is this guy doing with his own safe? We don't have safes. We got open desks. We can't even put our yogurt in the refrigerator without somebody steal it. And Gellman's got a whole floor to himself. I mean, were there any internal issues there at the Post as to what exactly you were up to with all of your Mission Impossible security up there?
Can I weigh in here?
You should weigh in, Joe.
I was hoping you would.
I went to Bart's lair, his special room, and it was more like Get Smart, you know, all the different doors you have to go through. You know, it wasn't Mission Impossible. It was so incredibly secret and secure, and there were all kinds of weird, like, passwords and computers that were actually not on the internet. They were only linked to themselves. I mean, I'm not giving away anything, right, Bart?
You just blew the
like
whole thing.
Super,
just totally blew the whole thing.
it was so weird and so not kind of like old school newspaper journalism, you know, where you have, you know, a bunch of ink-stained wretches sitting around, throwing copy around. It was a whole different thing. But the amazing thing was that Bart, with Marty Baron's blessing, pulled off one of the biggest stories of the last 30 years at the Washington Post, and it won the gold medal Pulitzer, and it was super risky. And it was Marty Baron's first year as executive editor. And anyway, you tell the story, Bart.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, Marty Baron was the editor of the paper. He had come from the Boston Globe. I had never met the guy. I was not, just as an aside, I was not a staff writer at the Washington Post at that time. I had left in 2010. I came back in 2013 and asked for a meeting as soon as possible with the executive editor, and I wasn't going to tell him why. I didn't want to explain on the phone what the story was, and I had this whole long list of crazy conditions that it was going to require to work with me on this story because of the sensitivity. And Marty, to his enormous credit, just sort of smiled an enigmatic smile and said, "Okay." So then I told him what the first story was about, and he took significant risks for the paper to get this story, including in our very first meeting, he agreed to do something that the lawyer advised him not to do.
And what was that?
I asked him if he would keep a hard drive for me, and I didn't tell him what was on it. He understood implicitly what it must be, but it was encrypted. It was the encrypted Snowden archive. I wasn't giving him the means of opening it, but I was very afraid of an FBI raid that would come and take it, and that I would lose my only copy. And I wanted one to be in a place that they would be deterred, I thought, from raiding. And I did find out a year after that the director of the NSA, Keith Alexander, had advocated that the FBI should stage a raid like that and should try to seize the documents back. He lost that battle.
Yeah, First Amendment. I mean, he might win it now, given who might be in charge at the Justice Department. Let me ask you this. Oh, you can't hear? Can you hear? Can you hear me now? Can't hear? How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, now I hear you again. Sorry.
I wanted to talk about Snowden. Actually, I'm sorry. One more journalistic question, and then we'll move to Snowden. Do you tell students, young people, can you hear me? No? Yes? You're frozen. It's like a Verizon commercial. Yes.
All right, I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry.
This kind of unofficial motto, serve the public interest but do no harm, is that emblazoned in your skull? Was it something that guided you through all of these stories, including back to writing Angler and things like that, and then to Dark Mirror? Is that something that you, like I said, it like burned in with the finger of God, almost like the Ten Commandments? And again, I'm saying, serve the public interest, but do no harm.
Yeah, well, that's a lot easier to say than to figure out what it means case by case. Let me just try to make it concrete. The first story I wrote was about a program called PRISM, under which the NSA was obtaining large quantities of data about tens of thousands, actually over 100,000 people from the big internet companies, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, Facebook, and so on. And the document had in it some specific targets. Particular, for example, there really was, a terrorist cell that they were spying on with names and places. There was a weapons of mass destruction program in an adversary country. There was a sort of important secret about another adversary country that had been detected by this program. So I told the US government when I called to talk to them about this story that I was not going to publish any of those things. I just said everything on page, whatever it is, 14 to 18, I'm not publishing that. But the government also asked me not to publish the names of the companies that it was getting this information from, Google, Microsoft, whatever. I said, why? And the chief lawyer for the director of national intelligence said, that if I named the companies might be embarrassed and would not want to cooperate anymore. And I said, that's not a reason that I can accept as harm that would prevent me from writing a story. If the harm consists of the public not liking something and then a company not wanting to piss off customers and therefore withdrawing its cooperation, that's why we write stories. We write stories so that the public can make up its own mind.
Wonderful answer. That's what needs to be enshrined and burned into people's skulls. Your answer, not the creed. Thank you very much for that. Let me move to Snowden. Just one question on himself, and then we'll try to get to questions about a lot of people trying to get their questions in with their hands up. Was there any change in your opinion of him? From the time you were engaged with him with the material to the time you were actually in Russia talking to him. In the book, sometimes, to me at least, he comes off as almost like an ex-spook who's relieved to be out of the game, and then almost petulant, like, why aren't people throwing me a parade, kind of a thing. Maybe I'm not being fair. Can you elaborate on what your opinion of him, both before the face-to-face and the face-to-face there in Russia?
Well, before I first met him in Russia, I had spent, I don't know, way over 100 hours online with him in sometimes live conversations, sometimes by email, but mostly live, encrypted, anonymized chat. I had formed a pretty strong impression of a guy who was very certain of his moral sensibility. He had very strong political views, very strong views about surveillance, was kind of prickly and difficult to get along with sometimes. I mean, I was not his ally. I believed he was releasing important information. I believed that he did more good than harm, but I wasn't his advocate. And there was tension between us. When I went to see him, I expected to find a guy living in Moscow who had lost everything in his life and was sort of, what have I done? And filled with turbulence. And I didn't find that at all. I found a guy who was Zen-like, at peace with himself, sleeping soundly, feeling like he had accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. Did you get the impression that you talked about one of the oligarchs who had sponsored some of the media over there, that he was, that might be explained because he was basically being wined and dined, or was he really in that kind of a Zen-like self-reflection, just in your opinion? If I could find any evidence that he was being wined and dined, taking money from the Russian state, cooperating with Russia, giving them information, I would have put it front and center in the book. It would have been a huge scoop. Right. I worked hard on that, and I didn't find it. The people who know the most about it, like 2 successive deputy directors of the NSA, told me that they had no evidence that he was cooperating with Russia, that anybody who's in the intelligence world would suspect it because you're going into Putin's Russia. But there are lots of complicated reasons why Putin might tolerate Snowden's presence and think it would be a fun idea to shelter him. Right. Without that. And just for those who don't know, Snowden didn't go to Russia on purpose. He was trying to change planes on the way to Ecuador when the US government canceled his passport. So he was stuck there. I'll give you one piece of circumstantial evidence, just one of many. When I was getting ready to come visit him in Moscow, he said to me one day, on this live chat, said, whatever you do not bring any documents here. It's not safe for you to try to bring anything secret here because the Russians will compromise your gear. If he were working for the Russian government, he would surely have said the opposite. He would have said, make sure you bring that stuff because I want to show you some things that I don't think you noticed. Right. We got a lot to talk about. He would have been trying to get more valuable information for the Russian government. And so there were lots of signals that in which his behavior made no sense in the context of Russian spy. Thank you for that too.
let's try to move to questions. If you have a statement before your question, try to edit that and make it a little tinier and get right to the question so Bart can do his thing. Jordan, I know Bob Blakey he's had his hand up for like an hour.
Must be getting tired.
Yeah, can he go first?
Yeah, let him go first. Bob, you're up.
Hey, yeah, I'm on, yes, and I presume you can hear me. Hi, Bart, thanks very much for doing the session. Very quick background, I've been doing information security for the last 40 years, and I will admit that I have the book on my iPad, but haven't yet read it, so if you've already answered this in the book, apologies in advance. The question is really about your email security measures and your communication security measures, and my question is this something that you can really only do once in a career? Because after the NSA or other intelligence agencies are watching you this closely, there's just very little chance that that your information won't be intercepted with whatever precautions you can take.
I think it would be an article of faith among real information security experts like yourself that that if let's say one of your top 10 digital predators has set their sights on you and determined to get what you're doing, they'll get it. So yeah, I mean, I flew under the radar in this story because when Snowden first approached as an anonymous tipster who called himself Virax, which I had to look up. Some of you guys would have already known that that's Latin for truth teller. He came to me through an anonymous channel, and I had already set up encryption and anonymized channels for myself with some of my sources, because I knew that the US government sometimes tried to trace the sources for my story and try to investigate them. So I knew how to do that stuff, and there was no reason to tie those identities to my real identity. But yeah, if someone has decided to crawl into my digital life and put real resources into it, I can't stop it.
Thanks.
Thanks. Next, we only have one other question right now, so that would be Julie Hatterer. So I'm going to unmute you, and you should be up. Julie?
Hi, class of 79. Actually met you many years ago when you wrote Angler, and it was fabulous, and I look forward to reading the book. So Laura Poitras had a lot of issues at airports. She wasn't able to travel. And I'm just wondering whether you had any experiences like that, where you would get to an airport and you were like blacklisted, or at any point were you fearful of the government's retribution?
I worried about losing my reporting materials. I worried about having them taken from me, and I worried about having a copy of them stolen. And I was prudent about my international travels. At the international border, at the US border, the Fourth Amendment requirement for a warrant for a search does not apply. Anybody can be searched for any reason or no reason. And so the US government sometimes uses that freedom to search journalists while they're crossing. So when I went to visit Snowden, I took the precaution of, bringing essentially a burner laptop with nothing on it, a burner phone with nothing on it. I didn't want to have any documents with me. I was not stopped. I never got the secondary screening. I did, through Freedom of Information Act litigation, get some copies of some of my records from the government. I'm still in litigation about that. One of the things I found out was that there was, I can't remember the exact number, but there was something like a 63-page report on every international flight I ever took. Almost all of it was redacted. So, I mean, they were paying attention, but it did not make itself known to me. My luggage was searched sometimes without my knowledge. I mean, when I wasn't there. And I found that out through the FOIA request as well, but not what they were looking for, or what was the basis of their search.
Okay, we have a question from Peter Williamson. Peter, are you there? He's muted.
Peter?
Here we go.
Yeah, quick. Bart, first, thanks very much for what you've done. I mean, you put yourself in an incredibly difficult situation, a risky situation, and, you know, I, for one, certainly appreciate all of your efforts. It's remarkable. I'm curious from, you know, you've got a unique perspective on the loss of freedoms that has come with the kind of surveillance that you've learned about in your research. And, you know, as far as I can tell, it seems like pretty much a one-way street. But I'd be really curious about your perspective on that. I mean, is the loss of privacy, is the loss of what I perceive, I guess, as personal freedom, something that is entirely irreversible in your mind at this point? Or do you think that this is a pendulum that will potentially swing back in the other direction at some point?
It's a really interesting question, and my view on it changes from day to day. So the reason the book is called Dark Mirror, it's the image is of a one-way mirror, like in one of those interrogation cells. So the government can watch us. The glass is completely transparent on its side, and we can't watch them watching us. And that's the most dangerous thing, I think, about it when surveillance takes place in secret, because it's a power relationship. Information is, it's a cliche to say information is power, and who knows what about whom is a pretty good proxy for who governs whom. And at some ultimate level, we're supposed to be governing them. The consent of the people is supposed to be the basis for legitimate government. And so the stories I thought were most important to write were the ones in which the boundaries of the law had secretly shifted. And it does seem to go in kind of a one-way valve. I mean, once they start doing one thing, they keep doing it, and then they find some other reason to use the information, and then they find another purpose for it. And so it all seems to go in one direction. But disclosure brings about debate. Debate can bring about legislative change, which it has done to a modest degree. In this case, it can bring about litigation, which it has done. In this case, there were cases for years that tried to challenge the constitutionality of U.S. government surveillance, and that litigation was mostly dismissed for want of standing. So the plaintiffs couldn't prove that they were subject to this surveillance because it was secret, and so they were not allowed to bring their case, or the court found that it didn't have jurisdiction for related reasons. But once the Snowden disclosures came out and the documents came out, that enabled, and then the required government responses, that enabled private links, the fiber optic cables that...
Hey, Bart, you
Yeah.
dropped out for a while. Do you mind just sort of rewinding a little bit? And
Sure, how far am I?
Before the fiber optic
Yeah.
comment.
Well, I that was just to say that technology can be an answer sometimes. So I wrote a story that disclosed that overseas, where it was not constrained by domestic law, the NSA was breaking into the private links between Google and Microsoft and Yahoo data centers overseas. So these companies have enormous data centers in foreign countries. They buy thousands of miles of fiber optic cable that's either bought or leased, that's private. Only they use it. It's not the internet that connects those data centers. And the NSA was breaking into those links in order to help itself to data. Now, the big internet companies were very angry when they learned about this. They did not know it. They found out from my story. And they started building technical countermeasures. I mean, they were spending tens of millions of dollars to prevent surveillance by their own government, which was an extraordinary thing, and it works. Those cables had been unencrypted because they didn't feel the need to encrypt data that was traveling on highways that they owned and no one else traveled on. But when they found out that the NSA was there, they encrypted it, and that's changed the balance of power.
Thanks. We have a question from another class of 82 journalist, another fine journalist, Lisa Belkin. And you're up, Lisa.
Technically, it's not my question. It's my husband's question.
Oh, then I'm muting you again.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Bart.
Hi.
So the question is, what do you see in store for him in the future? Do you think he ever gets back from Russia? Do we ever become hero in any sort of a way? What do you see his sunsetting?
So I'm way better at predicting the past. I don't know what's going to happen to him, but he's not going to come back to a friendly welcome in the United States. If he comes back to the States, he'll be charged with espionage and he'll be convicted. Even though it's nothing like what we think of in lay terms as espionage. I mean, a spy tries to stay hidden and unknown and deliver information for the sole use of some foreign adversary, and they hope that the loss is never detected and that it's used to the detriment of the United States. What Snowden did, like any reporter source, was to give information to a reporter for purposes of making it public to assist debate in his own country. And in his case, unusually, he decided to come out and declare himself as the source. So it's nothing like espionage in that sense, but the law simply says if he had legitimate access to the information and he gave it to anyone who did not have legitimate access, then he is guilty of the crime of espionage. So he can't come back to a friendly welcome. He probably, I don't see any reason for Putin to eject him, and I see some reason for him not to. Snowden, as I said to you before, I do not believe that Snowden is an agent or cooperating with the Russian government. However, he's a former intelligence officer of the US government, and he's in Putin's Russia now. I don't think Putin wants to send him back because he doesn't want to discourage other intelligence agents of other countries from coming forward. So I think Putin has plenty of reason just to let him sit there. His girlfriend moved to Russia, they married. He's got a job working for an American NGO. I think his situation can go on indefinitely.
Thanks. We have a question from Maria Huerta Cervantes, class of 11. Did I not unmute you?
Hi,
Okay.
sorry, I think we were kind of wrestling with the mute button. So I guess as you're talking about this, and it seems like it's like an arms race with surveillance, would you say that these Snowden type leaks are inevitable, or can the intelligence community reach a more sustainable balance of how they communicate with us as a public? Or are we basically just doomed to build up mistrust with all these unauthorized purges every decade or so?
Great question. I think that Snowden had a salutary effect on the relationship of intelligence agencies with the public because of him. Sort of senior intelligence and national security officials reluctantly have agreed that there was an overdue debate, that they should have said more. They said that they mostly believe that Snowden had no right to do what he did, that he should be punished for it, but they admit that there was an overdue debate. Because of his disclosures and because of all the interest in his disclosures, they are now telling us more. They actually set up a website, I See on the Record, which was a Tumblr. And they made public, for example, many previously secret opinions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and documents and legislative hearings and some of the internal rules across those documents, and there's some that they won't release. but because of Snowden, they are more open than they used to be. Nevertheless, yeah, it's an endless cycle. I think the government tries to keep secrets, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. Journalists try to find them out. Sometimes people who style themselves as whistleblowers play arbitrage in that process, and I think we can count on that continuing.
Thanks. There's a question in the chat, which I'll read because this is from Jeremy Kessler, class of 94. He says his microphone is having problems. So his question is that he Googled Q Group at NSA, and it appears to be an internal policing group. Can you say anything about that?
Yes, Q Group is exactly that. It's part of the counterintelligence subdirectorate of the NSA. It's probably called something different now because they change all the designators from time to time. But if they have a breach, if they have a Snowden, Q Group is going to be working to find out how the breach happened and investigate it. And they'll then work with the CIA, they'll work with the FBI to the extent their jurisdictions overlap. It's not Q from James Bond, which is too bad because that's the more fun part.
Okay, we have a question from Smiling Dave Holtzman, class of 82.
Hi there.
You seem to be
Hi,
mobile.
Bart.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, I'm walking around Burbank, getting my steps in. So my question has to do with sort of that long overdue debate. It's about, I wonder how people's opinions have changed about the stuff that was at the heart of the Snowden reveal, about the secret surveillance. Whose opinions have changed and which way have they changed?
Well, that's really interesting. Well, some of the senior officials' opinions have changed, I think. I mean, when Jim Comey was head of the FBI, he was responsible for the investigation into the espionage case against Snowden. When I sat down with him for a long lunch one day, a couple of years after the fact, he stunned me by saying he thought that there were costs and benefits to what Snowden had done, and he thought probably the benefits outweighed the costs. I just didn't expect to hear that from anybody who had been in his position. There is a weird political alliance in Congress of sort of right-wing libertarians and left-wing Democrats who are both suspicious for their own reasons of surveillance. We now have a president who is also suspicious of surveillance for his own reasons. He does seem to have kind of an emotional revulsion for the idea of being spied upon. Although the stories are that when he was running his hotel empire, he would listen in on guests. So who knows? I don't know how many people have changed their minds. I think certainly the companies have. The tech industry, which was very comfortable cooperating with the NSA, is much less so today.
Okay, we have a question from Chris Schulte. Chris, I'm trying to unmute you.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
I just had a question, Bart. When you were writing the book and writing all the articles before that, were there times when you really wondered if you were doing the right thing, had sort of ethical dilemmas about particular aspects of it? Were you questioned if you were doing the right thing, or were you always sure that that it was for the greater good?
God, I hope I'm not one of these people who's ever always sure that what I'm doing is for the greater good. These were hard questions. And the book brings you completely inside them. I mean, I try to make it a completely honest look at what the journalistic process was like, and it's embarrassing from time to time, and I'm filled with self-doubt from time to time, and I go through these cases chapter and verse. As I said, I think there were hard questions. Like take for example, Snowden gave me 160,000 communications that had been collected under the PRISM program so that I could see how much it intruded into people's private lives. Now, first of all, even he didn't think that that should be made public, you know, in bulk. If he wanted to, he would have put it on the internet. He knew how to work the internet. He wanted reporters to look through the material and decide what was newsworthy. I thought it was extremely newsworthy. On the one hand, that you could see the degree of intrusion into intimate lives of others. It was also the case that there was stuff that if I were an intelligence officer, I would find extremely valuable about foreign adversaries. That if you tip them off, then you lose access to that valuable information. And then there was the ethical question of who's snooping on whom. Now I'm in the position where I have this intimate look into people's private lives that the NSA took, and who am I to make that public? Wouldn't that even compound the damage, make it worse? And so it was a real dilemma. I was stuck, and it took me more than a year to decide how to do it. So first of all, I worked with this colleague of mine named Ashkan to do some computer-assisted analysis of the pile. So we were able to, for example, find that for every target of the intelligence gathering in this pile of 160,000 intercepts, for every target, there were 10 bystanders that were swept up. Let's see, do you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the last thing
Right.
you were talking about was for every one person, there were 10 bystanders.
Right. So that was an important public policy thing to talk about. They have this program, they say it's valuable. I can see that it has value, but every time they go after a target, they've got 10 bystanders being swept in. And then what do they do with all that data? They don't delete it, they keep it. What kind of stuff is it? Well, it's really personal. So I found examples that I could anonymize, which I would say, you know, you could see people bathing their babies. You could see people trying on lingerie. You could see people talking about illness in the family, et cetera, et cetera. And then there were some examples that I gave with permission. I actually went out and reached out to one person who had been in hundreds of pages of anguished Facebook message conversation with her fiance, and they eventually decided not to marry. And this whole thing is in there. And I made contact with her and got her permission under certain conditions to write about the case. So there was a big ethical dilemma there. It's one of many, many that I faced during this time. And I always consulted with the government, asked them questions, looked for context for what I knew, made sure I knew what I did think I know was accurate. And they had an opportunity to say, we think you shouldn't publish this because. And sometimes I agreed and sometimes I didn't.
Jordan, we're at 10 minutes after you. Maybe take 3 more questions. And
There
then
are
that-
two people with their hands raised and one person with a question in the chat. So Bart,
Okay.
if that's okay, we'll just stop after that. Is that all right?
Okay, sounds good.
So we're going to start with Andrew Wilson. So I'm trying to unmute you, Andrew. There you go. You're up.
Should be unmuted now. Thank you. I know you hate to predict the future, but you are a highly knowledgeable observer. There are already places in the world where citizens must use contact tracing apps for the pandemic. And if we come back in a couple of weeks, it's not impossible. The US or states within the US will join them, and you'll be required to carry contact tracing apps on your phones. Do you think the surveillance state is going to have the self-discipline to not tap into that information?
If something is lawful, they'll do it. There is very little self-discipline in the intelligence community because they're held to a standard in which nothing bad can ever happen that they didn't know in advance and stop. They're held to a sort of zero tolerance. So if you're in their shoes, of course you're going to want to know everything you possibly can. That doesn't mean that we as a well-ordered society should give it to them. You know, there are trade-offs. But I mean, for the same reason that we don't let police turn out everybody's pockets if a wallet goes missing in theater, we put limits, even though we know it. In fact, it will handcuff them. It will reduce their efficiency. But I think inefficiency is a feature, not a bug, when it comes to some degree, to the intelligence establishment and to criminal law enforcement as well. These contact tracing apps are potentially useful. I have not seen a ton of evidence that the epidemiological community is driving that conversation. It started with tech companies saying, we can do something cool that could help here. So I would want to know that the public health authorities actually really need this and want it. And then before I would feel good about it, I would want to see, first of all, that there would be legislatively mandated limits on what's collected, how long it's stored, who has access to it, when it has to be deleted. You know, there are some things that you'd want to do in an anonymous, aggregated way. There's some ways that you can anonymize data, although it's very hard to prevent re-identification. That is to say, you could say, well, I'm just calling you X, Y, or Z, and I'm not giving your name, but a data scientist can pretty easily put back identities on a data set like that almost every time. So I'd want to know that there were practical and legislative limits, and that the person who was going to, the body.
Cut out, Bart.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Now I do, yeah.
Okay.
So I want to know that whoever has the data can protect it from hackers. This would be immensely valuable data. It would be worth billions of dollars. Talking about where people are, who they're proximate to, and what their health status is. That's very valuable data. It's very personal data. And there'll be a lot of motivation for people to hack it. So I would want to know that you had good security.
I have a question in the chat from Eric Hellman, class of 81. Do you have anything to say about the Earn It Act, E-A-R-N-I-T? I don't know what that is. Maybe you do.
I'm blanking. I remember reading about it, but I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, so the answer is no.
The answer is no.
Okay, we're gonna end this with
we lose Bill Bandon, or
no? I think I unraised his hand for him. So Bill, okay. You're up. If I can get you unmuted.
Okay.
There you go, Bill.
Hey Bart, how are you? Given your long experience, I'm sure that you've been able to, not so much been able to, but you've kind of predicted, you know, there's a lot of stuff and a lot of shit that can go on. But through this whole experience, was there anything that even wowed your jaded perspective? Like, oh my God, did that really happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the technical capabilities, some of the things that I didn't write about, that I won't talk about, definitely wowed me. But I just don't think I should disclose them. So I'm sorry, that's a kind of a tease of an answer. But the scale, I mean, the scale of NSA operations, the scale of the ambition, which is to be able to collect any data anywhere in the world belonging to anyone at any time, it has not reached that level of capacity, but it's getting closer. And so the sheer ambition of it kind of blew me away, and the systematic large-scale ability to pull in bulk information, to basically stand at the crossroads of the internet, at the trunk lines and the main switches, and pull in everything and sift it and decide what it wants to keep. That surprised me. That kind of amazed me. Plus, there were mysteries that I mean, I had spent a lot of time during the Bush-Cheney administration trying to find out what the warrantless surveillance was that almost led to the resignation of half the Justice Department. You might remember there was the scene at John Ashcroft's hospital room where they tried to get him to sign something that would allow this secret program to go on. In any case, I'd spent a lot of time trying to find out what that was, and there in the Snowden documents, there it was, laid out and explained in complete detail. So that way, it was kind of a reporter's dream come true.
Well, we'll end on that reporter's dream come true note. Everybody get the book, Dark Mirror by Bart Gellman. Again, support your local independent bookstores. It has been a pleasure, and thank you for boiling it down for all of us. And sorry, we could have talked for about 3 hours tonight, really.
It's very cool seeing everybody's face on here. I like it.
Well, that's what the NSA is saying right now, and the Russians.
Yeah, you're all
section.
now associated and one hop away from me, so sorry.
Great. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, everybody. And on behalf of the class of 1982, I hope everybody enjoyed this. Enjoy what's left of reunions. You may or may not know that there are actually reunions programs going on all next week, I think. So there are things to see and things to do. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.